This podcast is brought to you by North Carolina's electric cooperatives.
This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former Secretary of State, former Attorney General Rufus Edmisten, Chris Fitzsimon, North Carolina Policy Watch, Syndicated columnist and author John Hood, and Brad Crone from Campaign Connections, Political Connections. Well, this past week, this panel participated in the Sheriff's Association meeting in Blowing Rock. It was kind of foggy up there, but we enjoyed interacting with our law enforcement officials. On this week's show, number 993, we're going to talk to the panel and get them to comment on how to reconfigure education spending. We'll explore what North Carolina is going to be like in 2050, and we analyze the results of Tuesday's elections. Plus, as always, we're going to get the panel to tell us something we don't know. Let's get to it. Beginning with last Tuesday's elections, both at the national and municipal levels in North Carolina, Democrats won governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey, but also had big victories in legislative and other races. Brad Crone, many pundits are saying that what we witnessed Tuesday was a clear victory for Democrats and a backlash against Donald Trump. Is that your take on what went on?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the Democrats had a very successful night, and a lot of it was just pure backlash. I also say that it was the match that lit the fuse that's going to go to campaign 2018, and the Republicans, not only in North Carolina, but probably across the country, have got to be worried about a potential tsunami. Here in North Carolina, the question is, in 2010, Democrats lost 16 seats in the House, 11 seats in the Senate, with a president who had a 43% approval rating, Barack Obama. Trump's down to 35. What will the numbers look like next year?
Rufus, there are a lot of people saying the Democrats shouldn't be so fast to do a victory dance here, because some of the recent polls are showing that people aren't really that much in love with the Democratic philosophy as much as they're opposed to Donald Trump. You agree with that?
Well, that was enough to do it in Virginia, for sure. And I don't really agree with that. I think that people are so fed up with the personal behavior of this guy. Now, I don't want to get us in trouble on NC Spin, but my goodness, the personal behavior of the guy that we call president now has gotten from atrocious to absolutely critical. And I think that is what people are voting on, Brad and John and Chris.
But John, you always say that in off-year elections, the party not belonging to the president always, or the party belonging to the president, always loses seats in Congress and throughout the nation. Right?
Well, I say that because I have a keen grasp of the obvious. This is almost always the case for the
You're
odd
good
number.
at numbers, huh?
Well, I'm good at opening my eyes and seeing the sun come up and set at the end of the day. Usually in off-term elections, the odd number year or the even number midterms, the party that's not in the White House takes a bath. Sometimes it's really bad. I mean, the way I would put it this way is Barack Obama, in electoral terms, was excellent news for the Republican Party. After the Obama's years, it was the strongest Republican Party since the 1920s. Now, as of the election cycle this week, Donald Trump has been good news for Democrats. Now, it's too early to know whether it's excellent news, because we're going to have to see how it plays out in 2018, but this is a pretty standard sort of a cycle. I'm actually a little surprised that people were that surprised, certainly about the gubernatorial races. Now, I do think the Democrats doing very well in the legislative races in Virginia. They mostly won districts that were Democratic leaning for president. Hillary Clinton had won some of these districts by 55, 56%. The Republicans held some of these districts. It was a natural thing for the Democrats to pick them up, but it was definitely good news for the Democrats.
Chris, let's move, if we can, to some of the races in North Carolina, because we had some interest. Go ahead, you had a comment.
I just want to say one quick thing. Is the Republicans, the Democrats in Virginia haven't done as well in General Assembly races since 1899.
Wow.
It was 66 to 34 in the Virginia House, and we're going to have some recounts. It might be even. they might have made up 15 or 16 seats. They actually had the first openly transgender woman. She defeated a social conservative who called himself the homophobe of Virginia. The most socially conservative, served 13 terms of the Virginia House. They won races they didn't even think were competitive because they put their name on the ballot. This is equivalent to what happened in North Carolina in 2010.
Yeah. All right, let's move to some of our local races, and I'll start with the race for mayor, the runoff race for mayor. Three-term Mayor Nancy McFarland here in Charlotte beat Charles Francis. In Raleigh, I mean. 17% of the voters cast ballots, and in fact, more voters cast ballots in this runoff election than actually did in the primary election. What was going on here?
Well, one candidate had a consultant working for him, getting the vote out. He was on the NC Spin panel. But I'll tell you, this is sort of the same theme that I think.
Is this bad bread?
No, well, I don't know. But one of the things that I thought was interesting in Virginia, it was interesting in a lot of other places, and including North Carolina, the turnout was up significantly, and I think this also a result of
17% statewide.
There are a lot of people who are very angry and upset. This is the first time they've had to come to the polls and vote. And not in every case, but in most of these cases in municipal elections, the more progressive or liberal candidate won and won decisively.
Brad, we saw a real division in the Raleigh mayor's race, though, did we not? It almost fell out on racial lines.
Absolutely. It's a chasm that the incumbent mayor is going to have to address as she moves forward. She ran a very good campaign. Charles Francis, I worked on his campaign. Charles ran an excellent campaign. They were both very good candidates. Both of them worked on turning their base out. And what you saw is that Nancy had a broader base in West Raleigh than East Raleigh.
Rufus, let's go to the Charlotte race. Charlotte Mayor Vi Lyles, Democrat, defeated Republican Kenny Smith by a 20-point margin in Charlotte. Now, Charlotte's been largely Democratic for a number of years, but this was the biggest margin in 30 years. Why such a big turnout, and why such a large margin for Lyles?
Well, back when the Republicans, Tom, took over everything, they were mad about people doing nothing in the Congress, and I think they're disgusted with the way things happen now. In Charlotte, you've had a lot of Republican mayors, but they've all been very moderate. Sue Myrick, Governor Pat McCrory, and I am not surprised at all. I think
if you
that
look
would
at
happen.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think if you look at the Charlotte race, if you look at the Fayetteville race where an incumbent Republican mayor lost.
Three-term mayor turned out.
You look at some of the city council, Greensboro, some councilors that were more moderate to conservative lost. This was, as Chris is getting at, this was clearly a real partisan wave. In almost every case, not quite every case, but in almost every
case. But John,
case.
in the Charlotte,
Greenville.
Greenville is the one exception where the Republican won.
Right, but the interesting thing about it is in Charlotte, there were 5 candidates running. They've now got a 9-2 plurality, Democrats over Republicans, but the 5 new people who were elected are all under 40 years of age. What does that tell you?
Well, they're younger than all of us. That's, I think, what that tells us.
Is this going back to the math part?
Yeah, again, I have a keen grasp of the obvious.
All right, Charlotte's, as John was saying, Fayetteville's mayor, two-term mayor, Nat Robinson, lost to the mayor pro tem Mitch Coleman. Were there some issues here,
Well,
Chris?
I think it's this wave that swept across North Carolina. And, both in the Raleigh and the Charlotte race, I wasn't surprised at the outcome, but I was surprised at the margin. You mentioned Vi Lyles won by 20%. I thought that was going to be closer. I thought the Fayetteville race was going to be very close. So again, this is it's not a major election year. It's a municipal election year. It wasn't a tidal wave, but it was a big wave.
Now let's look in Greensboro. The incumbent mayor there won, and won big, because I think people were tired of the legislature trying to get rid of her.
Also, he defeated the only Republican on the city council.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Brad, for the first time in almost 2 decades, Bill Bell wasn't on the ballot as mayor of Durham. However, the candidate he endorsed got beat, Steve Schewel and
Well, and I mean, Durham politics is always amazing to watch, but that was an effort by the Durham People's Alliance, basically stealing support from the Durham Black Committee, from the Durham Committee. So, a very interesting race.
But Steve Schewel was by far the most liberal candidate in the race.
Yeah.
There's no question about that.
Any
That's
other
what this
quick
was
takes
about.
on Tuesday's elections?
Well, a quick take is I think that we're headed toward a lot more unaffiliateds winning. A lot of people disagree with me.
What I would say real quick about the legislative races in Virginia and in New Jersey and what they tell us about North Carolina, if they are a portent, And again, I just want to be clear about this. The Democrats didn't really pick up Republican districts. They picked up districts that were leaning Democratic but had Republican incumbents for legislature. If that's a model for North Carolina, look for Democratic gains in places like Wake and Mecklenburg County, particularly if those, as we know, those districts were looking
Quick takes.
If Democrats want to win the state House back, they've got to win in rural and suburban districts.
Chris?
I agree with that, but they did very well in suburban districts in Virginia. I think that's the battleground.
Have you signed up to receive our free weekly email newsletter Spend Cycle? Well, it's easy to do. Just go to our website, ncspend.com, and sign up. And while you're there, you can view the latest NC Spend show, get video footage and perspective pieces not seen anywhere else, and read my weekly column. Get more balanced debate for the Old North State at ncspend.com, NC Spend on YouTube, or on Twitter at NC Spend Tweets. When we come back, how do you divvy up education spending?
NC Spend will return after these messages.
Agriculture is the backbone of our state's economy. It's the heartbeat of our rural communities. Its strength means bustling sidewalks and open signs in store windows. And with smart investments in our future, like the Plant Sciences Initiative and modern updated research stations, agriculture will remain the cornerstone of our economy. Because when agriculture is strong, our economy is strong.
For more than 45 years, the North Carolina Retired Governmental Employees Association has advocated for local and state government retirees. Whether protecting retiree benefits or fighting for cost of living adjustments, more than 70,000 members count on us to be their voice. Government retirees work for us, and we stand for them. Learn more at ncrgea.com.
We now return to NC Spend.
The subject is education spending and how dollars are divided. The task force of legislators is discussing our current system, which has been described as outdated, overly complicated, and out of whack with what students need. In addition, Superintendent Mark Johnson recently told the State Board of Education he'd commissioned an audit into wasteful spending within DPI. Rufus, a 2016 study conducted by the legislature's research staff says the current funding model favors wealthier counties because more experienced and better educated teachers want to teach in wealthier counties. Do you agree? And if so, why?
I certainly do agree. Wouldn't you want, if you had the choice of teaching in Terrell County or teaching in Mecklenburg or Wake County, wouldn't you come? Because you get, the richer counties can give supplements to teachers. They can buy the best school activity buses. They can do all these things, and that is just a natural thing in some cases, but they're going to have to get to some kind of a tiered system, in my opinion, where you give a set amount of money to each student, then you layer on it, what's that thing called?
Differentiated pay or whatever.
Something like that. You layer on what is needed for each student.
Chris, one of the things this study is examining, and there's some very interesting things about the way we fund our schools, is that school systems are given money for special needs students. However, there is no differentiation between special needs. There's some, obviously, that have greater needs than others, and they don't divvy them out. What do you think we're going to end up with here?
Well, we have a lot of different formulas. I mean, I think that's one of the things I hope that they come up with is something that makes sense. We have this tension here. We have rural areas that are struggling, that don't have a lot of money, but are even losing population. We have urban areas, as we talked about even in the last segment, we've talked about a lot, who have, they have a lot of money, but they have people flocking to them. They have to educate all these kids. The key is how do you do both of these things? In the past, we've had formulas that include something called maintenance of effort. Should you penalize a county or give a county more money who's not unwilling to raise its own taxes to help pay for the school? So there's a lot of variables here. I am a little disappointed that they're not thinking about adequacy as well, and that was a big debate at the first meeting about how much money we need for schools instead of just how we divide the money that we have.
Brad, one point that needs clarification is regards charter schools. Currently, charter schools receive funding for transportation, but they're not required to provide transportation for their students. Why should they get funding for this and their other services too, by the way, when they don't provide them?
I think that's been a real big question, policy difference that the public schools have had with the advocates for charter school is that they want transparency and they want an equal playing field. The one thing going to what Chris said You know, we set us back in the early 2000s, the low wealth school structure, and clearly that has not worked. So I applaud them for at least tackling the issue of how we're going through the process of appropriating our money.
John, let's move over to the ongoing feud between Superintendent Mark Johnson and the State Board of Education. Is it just my impression, or is there a lot of talking at each other, but not much talking with each other?
Well, I think there is more relationship than people would think, but still it's problematic, and there have been efforts to work out some of these differences that have not been successful. There are a lot of outside entities that are sort of egging this conflict on, which I don't think is helpful for either side. I just want to say real quick about the difference across the counties. Y'all are sort of getting there in my view, but it's important to remember that if you're in Wake and Mecklenburg County and you get a supplement, it's also a lot more expensive to live there. So it's not so much that teachers go to Wake and Mecklenburg because they will be paid more. In effective terms, that's not always the case. The actual deal is they just want to live in those places. They don't want to live in some of the rural places. It's not primarily a pay differential that explains that.
Rufus, one member of the State Board of Education at the meeting before last challenged Superintendent Johnson to address the elephant in the room, which was budget cuts. Johnson really didn't quite respond to that. But he said during his time in office, he's observed a lot of wasteful spending and that he's authorized $1 million audit of DPI. Comment on the challenge and the response here.
You know, if you got $1 million to do an audit, I think that could be spent on teacher aides or something. The elephant in the room is much, much larger than that. The elephant goes back to our first question. And I want to just add that in the first question, how can you have a study by the legislature when you don't have any principals on the study commission, when you don't have any students, when you don't have any of those other people, educators?
Parents.
I don't get it, parents.
Yeah. Johnson, though, Chris, kept going on and on and on about the wasteful spending, and finally was challenged by somebody about it. And basically, what he listed were excess rates for conference speakers, large sums for rooms and meals, $25,000 to sponsor a worldview symposium at UNC, and $2,500 for a single episode on a TV station. How significant are these expenditures in the overall DPI budget?
They're not. He's trying to use anecdotes, and when it doesn't really add up to a lot. When you talk about the audit, the General Assembly actually called for an audit in the budget that was passed and already counted on savings of $1 million in the second year before they even looked at it. I think a lot of this is politics.
Well, and we haven't heard the end of this story yet. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to be talking about what is North Carolina going to be like in 2050.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Life's busy, but you are the master at managing it. Thanks to your know-how and some helpful tools. As a member of an electric cooperative, you have access to lots of innovative tools that help you better manage your home energy use and your budget, so you can stay focused on what's most important. Discover how your electric cooperative can help you control your energy use at EmpowerMeNC.com.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
You sleep on concrete till your body get immune to concrete.
My mom got my brother and I up and said, come on, we're leaving.
I became homeless in the beginning of this year.
When I was about 4 or 5 years old, our house caught fire.
I used to see my brother. If he see me, he'd turn and go the other direction.
We did the only thing that we could think of, and we went to a Salvation Army shelter.
You know, we don't have this, like, what's your background look like? We just say, what do you need?
I remember the man from the Salvation Army coming down with a box of clothes.
The Salvation Army officer bought my brother and I an ice cream cone.
Last week, my brother walked up to me, and he just started a conversation.
Today, I've given my life to the Salvation Army because I remember what somebody did for me, my brother, and my mom over 30 years ago.
The Salvation Army, for me, means hope.
compassion,
family,
support.
We now return to NC Spin.
We spent a lot of time on NC Spin talking about current issues in our state, but from time to time we need to look beyond the next few years to anticipate what needs we're going to have in the future. Mike Walden, professor of economics at NC State and a person to whom we listen, has written a book in which he paints a picture of what our state will be like in the year 2050. Chris, Walden says that our current population of 10.2 million is going to grow to 13.4 million by 2050. Other than the fact that there's going to be a lot more people, how's all this change going to affect our state?
Well, a lot of ways. One is that the urban areas are going to continue to grow. He talks about the rural areas in North Carolina. They're going to lose population. I think the big question is, where are these 4 million people going to work? And that's the big question. Is technology going to be able to come up with the new jobs? There was a study recently that came out. MIT, I think, did a study that 50% of the jobs that exist now won't exist in 25 or 30 years. So the big question is how North Carolina shifts. Economies always shift in generations. We've got a huge one coming up. And I hope we're ready to realize that the jobs that we've relied on for so long are going to be there.
Rufus, one of the things he says that's interesting is that most of these new residents are going to be coming from out of state. Do you find that trend to be troublesome in any way? How's that going to change?
Well, if you're an old Southern boy like me from Boone, you always found that it's troublesome that the Yankees are taking over. And I hate to see what's going to happen to me on that. Can anybody assure me that I'll be here in 250? I got a lot of money for them. I want that question answered first. But I see this state being one green forest with a big blob in 4 places: Charlotte, Winston-Salem, Greensboro.
Well, he talks about that. He says that Charlotte, Mecklenburg, and Wake County are going to double in population between now and 2050.
It's like Chris says, what kind of jobs do you have? And what bothers me is that all we talk about are jobs in IT and jobs in IT. Something else has got to happen. And I know that you, Tom, don't think you're going to ever have any manufacturing left. But
I didn't say that. What I have said is there will be manufacturing, but we're not going to see it with large-scale employment like we used to see in the textile mills and furniture mills. And
it's going to be technology.
It's going to be small groups, and it's going to be automated technology and artificial intelligence.
I just want to know where in the heck you're going to drive in Charlotte and Raleigh with an additional 3 million people in the state. I mean, that's going to create a real big problem for our transportation grid. And the question is, are we looking at addressing it?
Well, talking about challenges, though, John, Walden says that the fastest growing group population-wise is going to be over 65. In fact, he says it's going to be 20% of our population, up from 13 now. Isn't that going to cause some real debates and problems so far as how we allocate dollars between elderly and education and various and sundry other?
Well, we will debate that as we always have and always will. If it was mostly young people instead of mostly elderly people, we'd have a different set of debates. I've read Mike's book. I enjoyed it very much. I think we should take some of these predictions, and I think Mike would agree with this, some of these predictions with a great deal of skepticism. Lots of times people make predictions like this. No one goes back and checks 30 or 40 years later to see if they happen. For example, I find it highly unlikely that the Wake and Mecklenburg are going to double in population. It is far more likely that people will start moving out of these counties. They already are. There has been an urbanizing trend for a brief time. I think it will go back to a suburbanizing trend. A lot of these older residents are going to live in Pender County. They're going to live in Henderson County. They're going to move into Johnston and Harnett County.
Chris, I got 30 seconds left. One of the things he talks about is education, and education needs are going to be changing. We've been saying you got to go to college. In many instances, the needs are going to change for the jobs.
Well, they're going to change, but I talked to him this past week. He also said we're going to still need the humanities and critical thinking skills. And what the big bright spot, a lot more viewers for NC Spin.
Which will still be on the air.
Which we hope will still be on the air. We'll all be in our dotage. After this break, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know, if they can remember.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
The healthcare landscape is filled with questions and uncertainties of changes that are coming. In these times of change, there's one thing you can trust. You can trust your family physician to work for you, not only in treating sickness and disease, but also your overall health. Regardless of how healthcare might change, the men and women of the North Carolina Academy of Family Physicians pledge to work upholding your trust. Family Physicians, your trusted healthcare advisors.
I help educate and inspire visually impaired students to strive for a brighter future.
I make sure visitors to the North Carolina Zoo take a walk on the wild side.
And I make sure that the fuel you buy is a quality product from pipeline to pump.
I support small businesses in North Carolina by matching them with hard-working, well-trained employees.
I make sure the roads you drive on are safe.
Scenic, the one voice speaking in support of the men and women who are making North Carolina great.
We now return to NC Spin.
Now comes time for one of the best parts of the show when we ask our panel to tell us something we don't know. And they don't know who I'm going to start with, but it's going to be John Hood.
Well, going into the election, so the Democrats had a great election cycle in 2017, and if the recounts turn out and the counts turn out and they take the Virginia House, they will go from 31 out of the 99 legislative chambers in the country to 32 out of the 99. It's certainly progress, but they have a long way to go, and maybe they'll get there in 2018, but let's keep that in mind.
Brad Crone, tell us something we don't know.
Tom, we talked about the opioid crisis in North Carolina while we were with the sheriffs up in Blowing Rock earlier this week. The other big healthcare crisis coming is going to be Alzheimer's and dementia, and how the state deals with it from a livable community standpoint, as well as available dollars and beds to help the families who are having to cope with
Education is always a big issue, but I think health care is going to be a looming issue in the future. Rufus Edmisten, tell us something we don't know.
As with the sheriffs again, we talked about gun violence. Since the beginning of 2017, we've had 307 mass shooting violence. We've had 11,000 people killed with violence associated. When are we going to do something about it?
Great question. Give me an answer to that one, and you can take over the show. Chris Fitzsimon, tell me something we don't know.
I mentioned the transgender woman who won a legislative seat in Virginia. In North Carolina, we now have, thanks to this, I think there were 6 LGBT candidates that won in local elections. We now have 18 LGBT candidates who serve in North Carolina. That number continues to grow. It's kind of interesting to mention that after the big battles we had about HB2 in the last couple of years.
Yeah, and still have some ongoing. Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, and read my weekly column, be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.